Hi, everybody. I wanted to talk to you about the realism essay, and I want to kind of make it easy on you. So, I made this quick little um, Google Slides here about writing an essay, and there are four characteristics that are gonna make your life much easier. We'll start with attitude. Without the right attitude, you just can't write. And we've been working together for what, 7 months now? And you should know this by now. If you're not getting the grades that you want on papers, is it because you don't have the right attitude? You're going into it with, this is stupid. I shouldn't have to do this. Why me? Oh my gosh, why so much work? I can't do this. Well, then that's going to come out in your paper. Your paper's not going to be good because you've already talked yourself into not doing well. So, it's life is tough right now. It's tough for everybody. I had a miserable morning. I was just so depressed. So I went out and walked my dog, took my dog out to OUL, and we took a long 2 mile hike around the hills and through the woods over there just because I couldn't take it anymore. I just had to get out of here. It's like that for a lot of us. So we have to put ourselves in the right mindset. And sometimes throwing myself into my work makes me forget about everything else that's going on in the world right now. And that's kind of good. And that might work for you too. Sometimes shutting off your screens, except your Chromebook, of course, and just working on um, getting the paper done might really help you feel better. Forget your problems for a little while. So it's never going to be fun like a roller coaster, but it can be kind of fun and maybe you'll just learn something. Desire. We have to have a desire to accomplish this task. Without the desire to do well, we're not going to do well. You have to desire to improve. If you're still writing like a freshman, well, what are you doing to improve what you're doing? Um, Writing is something that there's no cap. It can always be improved. So are you doing what you need to do to make it better? Willingness. You have to have the willingness to put in the work. If you're not willing to work, then your paper's never going to be very good. Your essay is just never going to be there. You have to be willing to gain the discipline to follow the MLA rules. You have to be disciplined enough to follow the grammar and punctuation rules. And you have to be disciplined enough to see font changes. You have to be willing to do the work and not just go to the web and grab big chunks to copy and paste like you think I won't know, because I always do. Finally is knowledge. You have to have the proper knowledge from the stories. If you didn't read the stories, no, your paper's not going to be very good. Did you only skim the stories? Then that's going to come out in your paper. Sometimes you have to read the stories twice. And the more knowledge you have about the stories, the easier the essay is to write and the easier it is to get an A. Just saying. Okay, so we need attitude, desire, willingness, and knowledge. Now, let's go to the assignment. So, the assignment, you are going to show how To Build a Fire by Jack London and The Open Boat by Stephen Crane are realism and or naturalism stories. So, you have a lot of notes on what realism is and what naturalism is. And now you've got to apply those to the stories. How do these come out? I don't care if you write about one story or write about both stories. It really doesn't matter to me. But this story's gonna, or this paper, I want it to be a 2-page minimum. And that doesn't mean a page and a half, and it doesn't mean a page and a quarter, and it doesn't mean one page with one line on the next page. No, a 2-page minimum. If you go over, that's fine. I really don't want you to write 5, 6, 7 pages, but if you go over, that's absolutely fine, especially if you're writing about both stories. Jamming that into 2 pages might be a little tough. So, in the requirements, you have to have an introductory paragraph. And in the introductory paragraph, not what I want to do. In your introductory paragraph, you have to have a hook, but I don't want to question now because I want you to start thinking differently. You need to mention the authors and titles, and you need to give a 1 or 2 sentence summary of the stories you're talking about. You need to have a thesis, and it needs to be something like the story to build a fire displays the elements of a work of naturalism. End of story. So it can be that easy. Let me highlight that for you, this example. Okay. Now your body paragraphs. Each one needs a topic sentence. I'm going to highlight that too. So it can't be about, the man goes in the Yukon. No, it has to be about realism. So I give you the example, and to build a fire, Jack London uses an unnamed character. So if you had a paragraph about that, I would know that you're going to talk about unnamed characters, which is an element of realism. And then you need to give examples from the story. Excuse me. You need to introduce quotes with context. For example, from the beginning of the story, we know that the man to build a fire is unnamed. And then I give the quote: day had broken cold and gray, exceedingly cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail and climbed the high earth bank where a dim and little traveled trail led eastward through the fast spruce timberland. So I give the context. It's right at the beginning of the story. Um, and then you analyze the quote. So, what I said about that quote is, since the man is traveling alone on a remote trail, we know that there is no one to call him by name. And because of that, the author shows he has no identity to nature. Additionally, without a name, the readers do not connect as much with him, which amplifies the fact that humans are insignificant from nature. Do you see how this is analyzing that quote? It tells me what the quote means, and it tells me what it means to realism. So that's really important to do. You should do that in each body paragraph. And then your conclusion, you're going to remind me of your thesis, but don't repeat it. For example, to build a fire shows a great human against nature struggle of naturalism. So here's my thesis. It displays the elements of a work of naturalism. Here's where I remind you: to build a fire shows the great human nature struggle of naturalism. But then we're going to open our topic up to today. So we are going to talk about what we're going on, how we fight against nature today. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Okay, to get an A, you have everything that I just talked about in your introduction. You also have that for a B. To get an A, you have topic sentences, which I just talked about. To get a B, you have topic sentences about realism or naturalism. You have plenty of textual support for an A. You have plenty of textual support for a B. You give it context to the textual support. You tell me what's happening in the story before you drop in the quote. You don't just drop in a quote without telling me who said it, what was going on. And it's the same thing for a B. To get an A, you've analyzed the textual support. You've told me how it shows that this is realism. You've told me how the quote shows that this is naturalism. The same thing with a B, but it's just not quite as good as an A. Your conclusion opens up the topic to today. To get a B, it also does. But an A paper is really going to make that connection clear. And a B paper, you might just not quite be as clear. For an A paper, you've proofread, and it's nearly mistake-free. I'll give you a break on 1 or 2. To get a B, you've proofread, but you have a few mistakes, maybe 3, 4, 5. To get an A, your essay makes sense on the first read. I don't have to read over paragraphs time and time again in order to try to figure out what you're saying. I get it the first time. It makes sense. To get a B, your essay also makes sense, but it might not be as easily read as an A paper. To get an A, You use MLA format flawlessly. To get a B, you also use it flawlessly because there's really not that much to it. To get an A, all your fonts match. And to get a B, all your fonts match. Now, when we get down in here to C, you still have a good introduction because I've told you exactly what you need. To get a D, you also have all of those things for an introduction. If you don't put all those things in an introduction, like I said, now you're down here into F range because you just didn't listen, you just didn't read, you just didn't follow directions. You must be unwilling to read them. To get a C, your topic sentences are more about what's happening in the plot. And that is also the same thing for a D. To get a C, you have some textual evidence, but not enough to prove your point. Whoops. And to get a D, you have a few quotes. You have the quotes in there because I told you to have quotes, and that's really all the reason you put the quotes in. To get a C, you don't really introduce the quotes except to say what story it's from. To get a D, you don't introduce the quotes at all. You just dump them in. To get a C, you try to analyze the quotes, but you're just not. You're more summarizing what's happening rather than telling me how the quote is realism. To get a D, you just don't even really try to analyze them. To get a C, you have a conclusion, but it really just sums up the paper. To get a D, you kind of end the paper, but you don't have a conclusion at all. To get a C, you may or may not have proofread. I can't really tell. You have a lot of mistakes. To get a D, you definitely didn't proofread. You got mistakes all over the place. To get a C, you use MLA, but with some errors. To get a D, you have an MLA heading. You didn't cite any of your quotes, but even the MLA heading's not correct. To get a C, most of your fonts match. And get a D, you just didn't care whether you copied and pasted quotes. You just didn't even pay attention to how the font switched. Okay, down here on the next page, I have a bit of a bit of a sample paper. It's not a full sample paper, but I've got some. So here's my MLA heading. All you have to do is copy it. Here's my title. So I'm going to make you have a title this time. And here's my hook. When children who have suffered continual abuse grow up, many of them are doomed to a life of poverty or worse, to an early death. Stephen Crane's Maggie, a Girl of the Streets shows what we face today has been a problem since the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s. In his book, Crane shows our heroine Maggie Maggie suffers at the hands of an abusive mother, an alcoholic father, and later a man who preys on her until Maggie, unable to endure, dies a violent death. As the author of many books in the realm of realism, Crane has created this tale that shows life as it really is, with nothing sentimentalized. So I am going to analyze this book, Maggie, a Girl of the Streets. No, you don't have to do that one. You're doing To Build a Fire or The Open Boat. But Stephen Crane, who wrote The Open Boat, also wrote this story, which is a really good story about a short book about this girl named Maggie who really suffers some horrible abuse. Here's my thesis. Oh, wait a minute. Here's my hook. Here's the author and title. Here's my brief background. And here's my thesis. Okay, and this thesis is exactly what you're proving. You're proving that your story is either realism or naturalism, whichever you choose. Okay, so then I have my topic sentence. Beginning in her childhood, Maggie suffers a cruel life, unlike those sentimentalized stories of children. So I'm saying basically that Maggie didn't have a sugar-coated, nice life. And I have a meeting in 4 minutes. I've got to hurry. Here's the context for the quote. So I'm telling you what's going on before I give the quote. Here, of course, is the quote. Oh my goodness, I'm running out of colors. And here's the analysis. Okay. So you can read through and look for all of those things. Okay. And then I just did a dot, dot, dot because I didn't give you all the body paragraphs. And then here is the conclusion. So I remind you of what the thesis is. Crane shows his readers what life was like in a New York tenement for a poor abused girl like Maggie. And then I open it up to our life and I show about what things, how we're dealing with things now and what life is going on. And, I brought in our current circumstances. And then I go back to Maggie. And then I come back to our life. Okay. So let me know if you have any questions. And hopefully, this is pretty easy. I really mean for it to be a pretty easy paper. So good luck. Let me know if you have any problems.